topic to talk about ethics. Recording in progress. Okay. So let's do next slide. Next slide. Oh, it's okay. Technical difficulties. Okay. So yeah, we're going to start with why we do this work. And there's kind of like two ends of the spectrum with that, and or why we do ethical psychedelic therapy. And we have the kind of like fun, positive, exciting, wonderful experience side, and we'll get to the other side. And so Lindsey and I wanted to share a little bit of our positive side, why. And for myself, it's getting into psychedelics was life-changing for me. The example I always use was my experience with MDMA, and I'd been working on opening up some heart space for a long time in therapy. And it was, a bit of a process, and something I had a lot of difficulty connecting with. And my first time I did MDMA, I finally got it. And it took 2-3 years of therapy and kind of changed that overnight. And since then, I was sold on the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics. So that's kind of my positive side of the spectrum example. Lindsey?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's really, really nice to be here. And so to share a little bit about my kind of more positive why, I'll pull a little bit from my journal from about 7 years ago. And so I wrote, there was life before and after, a crystal clear marking of time. My second ayahuasca journey was a night that changed my life forever. Nestled on my cozy mat in the heart of the rainforest, surrounded by trusted guides, the medicinal brew that I drank an hour earlier began to intensify. I became a bird and started flying around. I could see myself from above my body, my head slowly opening. I, who was no longer I, but a bird flying into my body, but instead of my body, I was a majestic forest. I could feel the wind, see the mountains, the trees, everything was effortlessly breathing as one. As I was flying through, I became filled with a sense of awe, okayness, and most of all, love. An experience that years later still touches me deeply as if it just happened. This was perhaps my first experience of something truly sacred. In an instant, I experienced awe, unity, and self-love that I never knew I was missing, but that began to fill a hunger that I was unknowingly starving for decades. I later understood that this experience was absolutely crucial so that I would have the trust in myself and in the medicine to enter into spaces that were vulnerable, deeply painful emotionally and physically, and that were also in need of healing. And this really began the process of getting in touch with all parts of myself, including the parts that wanted to celebrate and play in life and that yearned to be in connection with others, myself, and the natural world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Slide. Next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go next. And so the next slide will be some quotes from clients we've worked with. And this is also kind of positive side of the spectrum. Oh, too far. Yeah, there we go. Oh, Melissa, okay. So we have a 6-week and a 1-year follow-up. Hello, I just wanted to say thanks again for everything. Integration has apparently gone quite well, and this work has proven to be highly beneficial and sustainable in my daily life. I feel much more grounded and connected to the present. 1 year later, my work with psychedelics have remained one of the most profound and transformative experiences I've ever had. Life doesn't feel as hard as it once did. I feel at home in myself in a way that I never could have imagined. And so similar to our experiences, we see that supporting individuals therapeutically in these expanded states of consciousness can really help people across the depths of suffering. There's a lot of opportunity for moving past trauma, attachment repair, making sense of what was confusing. That's part of what really brings us to this work. Other side of the coin, next slide.
I get to cover the other side. So also pulling from an old journal entry that was from about 5 years ago, and where I really started to learn that the reality of the fragility of my psyche became really evident. And about 2017, that quickly became a terror trip. while I'd taken efforts to have a lot of proper supports in place, I learned that the support I had in place was not sufficient in holding me in some of these really painful depths of suffering that I was entering into. So this is part of that trip report. Suddenly, before I even realized what was happening or where I was, I lost complete awareness of anything that felt familiar of this world. The boundaries between myself and the outside universe began to blur. No consent, no gentle unfurling, pure and total terror and torture as my psyche was ripped apart and everything I once knew became fragmented into infinite aspects of kaleidoscopic chaos. In the brief moments where I could speak, I was able to scream and beg for help and for it to stop. But mostly, I was trapped inside this hellscape, fragmented into countless shards, language, both comprehension and speaking inaccessible, and only able to experience existential terror and impending annihilation that ripped my sanity and sense of reality into shreds. So yeah, that is definitely still kind of hits home as I read it back and kind of can connect back into that place. And kind of that why number one that we read, that beautiful experience that I described earlier, was so important, in giving me some of that confidence that I needed to move into these really hard spaces. And I learned that, yeah, there's room to experience love and connection, but there's also there was also room to experience terror and sadness and despair, like with what I just read. And so, but we also do believe that with proper support in place, that these challenging places can be navigated and can be really important to the process of transformation. And so that line between what Stanislav Grof coined as psychedelic emergence versus emergency is rather fine. And it's really important to handle that with great care, which is something that became really clear to me in my healing journey from that experience. And so sadly, the field has experienced countless cases of harm and abuses of power that individuals have experienced from therapists and space holders. And there's a history of people traveling to South America as well in the States, working with ayahuasca, where many cases of sexual assault and boundary violations have occurred. And these violations have also happened in other settings, in therapeutic settings, including a MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're one of the organizations that's sponsoring and has sponsored a lot of the trials. And in this case, two therapists gravely abused their power as well. And so, as we mentioned, that there's many steps that can be taken to reduce the likelihood of harm. It's also true that this work is not without risk. And so some of that risk can be severe psychological distress, re-traumatization, and in some cases, even psychosis, mania, and schizophrenia, which is part of the reason that tonight we really felt it was important to center the conversation around ethical psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsey. Okay, next. Yeah, so kind of what makes psychedelic therapy different? At its core, ethical psychedelic therapy is the conscientious and compassionate use of psychedelic substances to facilitate therapeutic processes. So they're guided journeys that aim to promote healing, personal growth, and self-discovery. These therapeutic approaches hold their foundation on principles that underscore safety, respect, and the overall well-being of those who embark upon these transformative experiences. So it has the same therapeutic or ethical underpinnings as traditional therapy. So we utilize NASW Code of Ethics, ACA, APA, all the kind of same Code of Ethics is our starting point. That said, there are some differences that are important to keep in mind. We're going to go through them, but they're kind of here on this slide. Boundary points, legal and regulatory issues, the reality working with non-ordinary states of consciousness, differences in physical touch, the need for personal psychedelic work, specific screening for psychedelics depending on medication, awareness of cultural differences, very importantly, recognizing the gravity of the medicine and the extended nature of the sessions. So next. Yeah, so boundaries. the same as ordinary state work, boundaries are the limits and guidelines that define the therapeutic relationship and the interaction of the therapist and clients in session and out of session. So we're going to think of the physical, emotional, ethical dimensions that ensure a secure and respectful space. We want to avoid some of the things like Lindsey alluded to, where there's been boundary violations, harm, hurt, lawsuits. We all like to avoid those. So we want to imagine the boundaries as the container that hold the therapeutic process. This container ensures that individuals can explore their inner landscapes within a structured space. They protect the delicate nature of the therapeutic journey. So these clear demarcations guard against exploitation, power dynamics, and potential ethical breaches. With psychedelics, people can really experience intense emotions, revelations, feelings of love, intimacy, trust, trauma triggers, and a little different than most other therapy, the disillusion of self. The default mode network comes down, ego dissolves. And I mean, it's a very different state than ordinary state therapy. And so what we want is clear, established, negotiated, and informed consent boundaries to protect both parties. So one of the things we keep an eye on with non-ordinary state therapy is people's inability to set kind of new boundaries in the psychedelic experience or looser boundaries in the psychedelic experience. And so, we're dealing with people who aren't sober, essentially. And so what we want to do is we establish boundaries on the front end, and they're clear, they're concise, everybody's on the same page with what they are. And what we want to do is we protect the client, we protect ourselves. Clients are really malleable when in a psychedelic state, and we want to safeguard that malleability. For ourselves, it's important to keep an eye on any countertransference that may come up. A lot of us have heard the MAPS trial, Salvador Roquette, Francois Borzat. And I mean, those are really clear examples of ethical violations, boundary violations. And there's a lot of harm that can come. If Lindsey, I don't know if what was the podcast that came out talking about the MAPS trials? Somebody put that in chat. So that's a great one to listen to. And it goes into the sexual exploitation that happened in one of those. So, those examples, they're kind of on the black and white end of the spectrum with the physical, emotional, sexual abuse, exploitation, but it highlights what can happen. I mean, hopefully more what we're potentially dealing with is the gray area, but definitely want to avoid those areas too. So general key takeaways: boundaries need to be clear, negotiated ahead of time, maintained during the session, and we keep awareness that the client is in a very vulnerable state. Next slide. Okay. So legal and regulatory considerations, a little bit different than most ordinary state therapy, at least that I can think of. As much as we really love it for it to be different right now, the legal landscape's pretty tight around psychedelics. Ketamine, at least in Tennessee, is the only legal psychedelic outside of some religious exemptions. If anybody's familiar with like Peaceful Mountain Way, well, I guess that's Kentucky, but Peaceful Mountain Way is a kind of local example of that. Those tend to be like ayahuasca or psilocybin retreats. There's places in the country where plant medicines have some sort of decriminalization, but locally it's ketamine. So as practitioners, it's important we have a clear understanding of the legal status of the substances we intend to use, recommend, or refer to. There's a lot of gray areas with that too. I mean, there's compassionate use. What do we do if, we think that some underground work could help a client? And, what's our ethical ramifications for referring for that? So we want to keep an eye on our responsibility beyond the therapeutic setting. We have ethical and legal obligation to ensure that our actions are aligned with the legal system. So we have client safety, adhering to law ensures that the safety of our clients. It helps prevent potential legal repercussions for ourselves or others. I mean, kind of going back to example with underground work, that's what we can also see with some gray areas as far as, do we refer or not? There's informed consent as far as the gray area legality of the religious exemption. It's legal, so to speak, but a bit of a gray area. Professional integrity. We want to uphold laws because that maintains the integrity of our practice, preserves the reputation. And generally, as psychedelic therapy gains recognition, our adherence to laws really helps the public's perception. Psychedelics are in a pretty precarious place currently. We're finally getting some good shifts in public opinion. Some research is kind of coming through, and well, we'll see what MAPS does. It's supposed to be last year, this year, and hopefully next year, but some positive progress with research. Fox News apparently covers psychedelics positively, so positive signs, but we don't want to fuck it up. So we just want to be careful with what we do with that. We don't want a repeat of the 70s through 2000s. Some good Nancy Reagan dare rave act stuff. We're hoping to not get more of that. So just be aware of the legal landscape, laws, regulations, and just kind of the larger implications in the community. So next slide. Okay. Non-ordinary states of consciousness. As covered, psychedelics introduce a non-ordinary state of consciousness. This shift from ordinary to non-ordinary varies based on the psychedelic, dosage, setting, mindset, a lot of different factors there. Even if we're talking about the psychedelic, different strains of psilocybin, for instance, can have different effects. So each psychedelic is as different to each other as alcohol is to marijuana. We like to put them all under this psychedelic umbrella, but there are a lot of differences. So although the physical and mental effects are different, they're similar in a lot of ways to marijuana or alcohol and how we interact with individuals. So consent is different because this person isn't sober. There's an ongoing debate as far as, do we trust clinical intuition during a psychedelic therapy session when there's been established consent or, informed consent on the front end? So what do we do if a client previously said, hey, I'm not really okay with a handhold, but in this non-ordinary state of consciousness, they say, hey, I really need this right now. So we're exploring some of those things, and that's an ethical consideration. I'm not sure there's really like a great answer to some of that. Usually we defer to safety. We create what we like to refer to as Ulysses pacts with clients. So these are like the freely made decisions that are designed or intended to bind ourselves when we're in a non-ordinary state. And so a healthier example tends to be like living wills. People enter into these when they're healthy or healthy enough, sound mind, and then healthcare practitioners are held to those agreements. So we utilize a similar thing. Non-ordinary states are the heart of the psychedelic experience. They open the doors to realms of the mind that are rarely explored, and they can be deeply transformative, insightful, emotional, provide perspective that have the power to catalyze profound healing and growth. So I know we talked a little bit about with the consent, but people are open to suggestion, manipulation, exploitation. When you see examples of this, we have some older examples of this, like a Charles Manson example, maybe, or we see a lot of psychedelics getting used with right-wing groups for recruiting and in-group politics. So for us, that's the power they have, and we need to acknowledge that and, really have high standards. A little bit more of kind of the fun side of that, though. I mean, these non-ordinary states have a lot of power to provide breakthroughs, to provide awe, to provide these ineffable experiences, and it's really cool to get to sit with that. And I think their benefits, it benefits from a lot of reverence for that. Even if they can be unsettling or challenging, our duty is to guide individuals through these states with as much skill and empathy as we can. We just kind of hold space for whatever arises, which can be some unexpected stuff, interesting stuff for both us and the client. And yeah, it's a really cool experience, but we want to have reverence for the power of it. Let's do physical touch. Next slide. Perfect. Talked a little bit about this so far, but psychedelic therapy involves a little bit more physical touch than most traditional therapy doesn't, or at least talk therapy. I think about my work with clients when I'm sitting in an office, or actually pretty much only do teletherapy now. There's zero touch with teletherapy. And so with this, a little bit different. Touch tends to be a part of, or an offering that can be part of psychedelic therapy. And so with that, we want to, once again, obtain sober consent, offering touch only for therapeutic purposes, no sexual touch, and really touch that falls within our scope of practice. As much as like I probably would have enjoyed a chiropractic adjustment when I've been doing some MDMA in the past, like not so much our scope of practice. So keep it scope of practice. So let's see. Yeah, with the consent talk on the front end, we want to discuss with our clients, like, how and when touch might be used, where touch might be used on the body, potential benefits, risk, again, no sexual touch. So usually the spiel we give clients at NPC is something along the lines of, our limits are, we are open to a handhold, like a hand on the shoulder. Depending on the client, we're open to kind of like a brief, appropriate hug. And then we let the client say, okay, where are you at with things? Because we're always open to less, right? And so I am or am not okay with handhold, hug, hand on the shoulder. And what we recognize with psychedelic therapy, and kind of going back to like sobriety, ordinary state of consciousness, is clients are always allowed to tighten or firm up boundaries in a psychedelic therapy, but generally we don't allow the loosening. So, I said I wasn't okay with a hug, but I really need one right now. That's, we have to defer to the Ulysses Pact that we previously created. That said, I mean, that's definitely an ongoing debate right now as far as what we do with that, because it's kind of hard to have that clinical intuition that this person is asking for a hug or a handhold, seems like what they need, but what is the ethical dilemma or imperative with that? So yeah, let's do next slide. Personal work. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So although we encourage personal work with psychedelics, they're not mandatory. Just want to say that. So it's an aspect that holds the potential to profoundly shape your journey as a practitioner. I know we've all heard before, like, therapists can only take clients as far as they've gone. And I think that holds a lot of weight in the psychedelic therapy world. That said, there's a need right now for psychedelic therapists, and definitely will be more so, I think, as other medicines come on board. And we want to, be careful with how we proceed with that, but provide like a reasonable barrier to entry. And so yeah, the general recommendation is do some work with at least one medicine. Usually what we want with that is, a pretty good depth of work with one medicine. Currently, of course, like legally, we'll say ketamine. Obviously, people have other options that they can explore if they want to. We can't technically advocate for that, but there's a lot of cool things out there. Usually, kind of what's helpful is to have experience with what your clients are working with and what you're working with. Given ketamine is what we're mostly working with right now, or solely working with, I guess. It's good to have experience with ketamine. There's a lot of places in town that can help with that. There's, Mind Bloom, Joyous, I don't know, probably some other organizations that somebody can put in chat. So we definitely want to encourage that. It really helps with empathy. Having personally walked that path of the psychedelic experience, you can better relate to the, feelings of sensation, joy, insights, expanded states of consciousness. And being able to have a little bit more of that deeper connection helps you, help the client navigate the psychedelic experience, helps you integrate, helps you prepare the client too. It's a lot easier to easier to explain what people are kind of signing up for when you've experienced it. I mean, that said, psychedelic journeys are mostly ineffable. They're pretty hard to hard to explain, so we do our best to kind of put that into words, but it's always a bit of a challenge. So let's see. Yeah. Personal experience with psychedelics allow you to just intimately understand the unpredictability and the vast range of emotions or experiences that can come up during journeys. as anybody knows that has journeyed before, I mean, journeys all vary too. All of them are different. And so one journey is great, 10 journeys is better to really understand the nuance, the variability, the differences that can come up in psychedelic sessions. Ineffable, right? They definitely transcend linguistic expression. And what we find with psychedelic therapy is a lot of what comes into the room is like a felt sense of where the client's at, both because we've been in a similar place, but also often because the client is unable or not very efficient at articulating what's going on. And so, having that felt sense is a really valuable part of what the therapist is able to bring to the room. And especially if a client's in a little bit more of a challenging spot, being able to pick up on that a little bit sooner, a little bit easier, a little bit more fluidly can really be beneficial. So with that, though, we do need to be aware of any countertransference that can come up from our personal journeys. Just because my journey went this direction at this point doesn't mean this person's will. So just something to kind of keep in mind with that. Let's do next. Okay, so screening, fun. So screening and preparation, I think Lindsey will talk a little bit more about preparation, but screening and preparation are the bedrock which psychedelic therapy is built on. So just as a solid foundation ensures the stability of a structure, a thorough screening process and comprehensive preparation pave the way for a meaningful and low risk, harm reduction psychedelic encounter. So our primary goal is to ensure the safety, or as safe as possible, of individuals throughout their psychedelic experience. As previously mentioned, psychedelics can evoke pretty intense emotions, experiences, reaction, trauma triggers, and just really a lot of reactivity in the system. And so we want to be sure, or as sure as possible, that one, we've screened, informed consent, and this includes also like medical issues. I think here on the slide, yeah. Ketamine, we look for like uncontrolled hypertension, acute or unstable cardiovascular disease, pregnancy, prior responses, negative responses to ketamine. And, so we want to do a really thorough both medical and mental health or psychological screening. History of psychosis, of course, a big one. Different medicines have different screenings. Psychosis is a pretty big one for all of them, but with something like ayahuasca, if somebody's going to go to, or actually, let's do a different example, like an MDMA, if a client's on an MAOI, definitely want to have a discussion with their, PCP or psychiatrist. I mean, same with like an SSRI, that'll really blunt or just kind of eliminate the effects of most traditional psychedelics, anything that interacts with the 5-HT2A receptor. So those are different rule outs for that. Something like MDMA can increase core body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate. And yeah, generally we just want to be aware because we don't want to put anybody in a bad situation, both emotionally, physically. And, overall, we just need to acknowledge that psychedelics aren't necessarily for everybody. As much as we'd love for them to be, not everybody's a good candidate. I mean, we definitely get, calls and messages and a lot of people that reach out for kind of last resort help. And it's puts a lot of pressure on us to provide the therapy. That said, of course, we have to balance that with, regardless of, where this person's at, actually last resort, not last resort, if there's a significant risk, we need to keep that in mind. So yeah, overall, we definitely just want to be kind of aware of the screening process, make some good decisions around it, balance that desire for us to help, to jump in, to, really take somebody on a wonderful experience with potential risks. Let's do next slide. So cultural competence, always good. So as we know, it's the ability to understand, appreciate, and effectively interact with individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds. In psychedelic therapy, part of it involves recognizing and respecting the unique cultural, religious, and social identities of clients and how that can shape psychedelic experiences, how that can shape integration with clients. So that influence can be profound, especially a good example would be like when we're getting into a little bit of like the transpersonal space with psychedelics. A lot of people can view it as a spiritual experience, a connected experience, a religious experience. And so knowing where they're coming from and what they might, some of their belief system, which of course also is a exploration process with the client, can really help us navigate or help them navigate the experience, integrate it a little bit better. Let's see, cultural competence fosters empathy and connection. As therapists, our ability to relate to clients' cultural beliefs and practices not only builds trust, but also enhances our capacity to truly understand their experience. Let's see, cultural competence allows us to honor the individuality of each client's journey. No two clients are the same, no two clients with the same belief system are the same, but really provides a little bit of a framework for us to be able to view the client, their experience, what they might be kind of thinking, going through, exploring. Many cultures have intricate beliefs that intersect with altered states of consciousness. A lot of indigenous communities view psychedelic experience as pathways to spiritual realms. Others hold reservations or concerns. Let's see, cultural competence equips us to navigate these complexities while remaining respectful and open-minded. So last slide of my part, long sessions. There we go. So this guy really has to pee. So psychedelic sessions can be long. Quite a bit different than most of my traditional therapy sessions, which are 45 50 minutes or 55 60, depending on how good on boundaries I am that day. Like on this slide, ketamine 2 to 3 hours, and these are kind of averages. MDMA 6 to 10 hours, psilocybin 4 to 8 hours. This can be attenuated by booster or no booster. So for a therapist, I mean, a couple of things to keep in mind. One is like physical preparation. So a little guy that has to pee. We like to, have our clients and ourselves use the bathroom like as soon before dosing as possible with, not disturbing the process too much. Because ketamine session, for instance, if I'm going to be sitting there while the client's under the medicine for 45, 50, 60 minutes, and then we jump into integration, I don't want to leave that client, even once they're kind of like out of the medicine, so to speak. I don't want to leave that client. So I'm there for probably at least an hour and a half, 2 hours. Myself, I love some coffee in the morning. And so I have to like always remind myself, okay, like low coffee day, minimize the caffeine. So there are some like physical preparation considerations. This is also why something like MDMA or psilocybin, the model is a co-therapist setup. And that is something that can be applicable to ketamine sessions too, if you want. Of course, there's like a kind of financial consideration of that and scheduling considerations. But yeah, just some stuff to keep in mind with the long sessions too. With the intensity of psychedelics, we want to be mentally prepared. These sessions can be very draining. If you think about a session with a client going through, let's say a divorce, and kind of traditional therapy, I think about like that's going to be a pretty intense 45, 50-minute session. We'll kind of get some sort of wrap up. Sometimes it runs over a little bit, but usually after those sessions, like need to pace the office a minute, take some deep breaths, go outside, something. But psychedelic session, we don't necessarily have that option. Maybe with co-facilitation, but if there's intense emoting for 60, 90, 120 minutes, that's something we have to just sit with, be prepared for. Have some good aftercare, some good before care for ourselves. Kind of look at limiting how many psychedelic sessions you might do in a day or week. Obviously, if it's like MDMA or psilocybin, probably 1 per day. But ketamine, you could stack 3 or 4 if you wanted, but I'm not sure kind of what that would look like as far as self-care or being able to show up for the client. So yeah, I think that kind of covers my part. Lindsey, yeah, I guess next slide.
All right. So just continuing on, we wanted to talk about ethics of psychedelic therapy, but really suggesting to view it through this harm reduction lens. And Robert shared some really great ethical considerations for this work. But what does this look like on a day-to-day kind of in action, kind of process? And so a lot of our approach at the Nashville Psychedelic Center has been shaped by the greater harm reduction movement. Erica Siegel, who's the founder of Nest Harm Reduction, she describes harm reduction as a set of practical strategies, policies, and ideas aimed at reducing the negative consequences of high-risk behavior and drug use. It has also been a movement for social justice that was built on a belief in and respect for the right of people who decide to utilize drugs. So there's many branches of the harm reduction movement, from high-risk drug use to supporting vulnerable populations, recreational psychedelic use, and intentional psychedelic use as well. And because the psychedelic community is rather broad and complex and full of nuances, we think it's helpful to have an understanding of the rich history of this movement as a whole and how it informs the psychedelic therapy field at large today. And so if we're breaking down those many branches into the branch of psychedelic harm reduction, knowing that this is one of the smaller branches of the overall movement, but within this branch, there's a recreational side, which is typically the crisis response, drug testing, festival-based services, like the Zindo project, which is at Burning Man right now, which is a really cool project. They have like a psychedelic kind of harm reduction tent that's a safe space for anybody that might be having a psychedelic emergency or even mental health crisis, or just a need for a safe space. And so just getting to be familiar with these different resources can be really helpful when working with clients that might engage with substances in a recreational setting. And then the other side of it, which is the harm reduction side around intentional psychedelic use, which is really, of course, what we're talking about tonight, which is when these substances are used in therapeutic setting, but also the rising popularity of these experiences in a ceremonial setting. And ultimately, these settings support the intention of it being used for inner work, which is not new, as Indigenous traditions have been practicing in this way for thousands of years, working with sacraments, with substances, as a mechanism towards spiritual connection and towards inner work and interconnection as well. But with the Western therapeutic model, which has roots going back to the 50s and 60s, and with a modern day resurgence in the field of psychedelics, of course, we're looking more at the therapeutic lens of harm reduction tonight. So next slide. So to kind of break this down in terms of like what this looks like, at least for us at the Nashville Psychedelic Center, which I would guess looks like many other practitioners who are also working within this field, thought that it might be helpful just to go over our model a little bit. As Robert mentioned, ketamine is the only legal psychedelic currently available, and it has kind of more traditionally fallen into two different camps. One is the medical infusion model, which does not include any psychotherapy, preparation, or integration services. And then, of course, again, what we're focusing on tonight, the therapeutic model, which is what we offer at the Nashville Psychedelic Center. And so in our work, we weave harm reduction into our model of care by providing intentional and thorough care, where we really, really emphasize the therapeutic process. We don't believe that anyone should really be alone in this work, and that, if we're really talking about reducing harm, that we really think that the therapeutic process is important. And so a lot of our therapeutic model is adapted from the Johns Hopkins model, which is a highly recommended approach for this work. And so, what does this look like? So when a client is referred to us, or when they generally reach out, sort of start with step one, which is a free consult call, free 20-minute call. Clients have an opportunity to ask questions, clarify what they're looking for, can ask them, and we also ask some basic screening questions from them, and generally just see if they would like to move on to the next step of the process. If that's feeling pretty good, we would go ahead and schedule the intake as well as the medical evaluation. As Robert shared, during the intake, we also, heavily screen. That's a big part of our process as well, and to see if they're a good fit for CAT, which is ketamine assisted therapy. And part of that screening process is the medical evaluation, which is a time where clients would meet with our medical provider, where they have to be cleared medically. And so this is also a big part of our model in the field of psychedelic therapy, is this really close-knit collaboration and integrated approach in doing this work, both with medical providers, but also with other therapists in the field. A lot of clients come to us and they do have a primary therapist or a team of mental health providers. And that's something that we really believe in offering, is really that collaborative care team-based approach with clients. And so step 3, which is preparation. Typically, we do have about 2 to 4 preparation sessions. It really varies for clients, but that's sort of our average. And this is where we really get to know clients and their psychology and really learn what they're hoping to get out of this process. And prep sessions are a mixture of logistics and plans in place for before, during, and after their ketamine session, while also identifying areas of focus, which might be traumas or stuck emotions, behaviors, areas of growth and exploration as well. But it also includes sharing information and education, as well as addressing expectations. And as Robert also talked about, it's also a time where we really focus on creating clear consent agreements around touch, as well as any other general preferences, whether it's from music or to like a favorite kind of blanket that somebody might have, that they want to bring with them. Really try to create an individualized and safe and special place for people. And so it's also a time during preparation where we begin to offer tools to help people navigate potentially really challenging states that can arise in the experience. One of the ways that we do that is through mindfulness and through guided imagery, parts work, as well as somatic practices, which start to introduce a little bit of what people might experience in an expanded state. And so through these kind of like practices, we can start to really offer some tools to help people navigate what might be coming up for them, which can also point to what might come up in the actual ketamine session as well. And so step number 4, which is the day of CAP. So our day of CAP, ketamine assisted therapy sessions, they're typically 2.5 to 3 hours. We are with clients the entire time from when they arrive to when they leave. We do require clients to have a driver to pick them up and encourage them to take the day off work so they can really have that day for themselves. And after they arrive, there's a time dedicated to settling into the space, preparing for their experience. This might include some mindfulness, some reviewing of intentions, reading a poem, or something to support the deepening end process. And that's something that we also go over with people in preparation of just around what kind of process might support them on the day of. What kind of, whether it's a little ritual or a favorite song or a poem, we really like to be collaborative in that process as well. And so after some time, our medical provider then comes up to administer the medicine. There was a question in the chat about our route of administration. Most commonly, we are working with IM, which is intramuscular, which is an injection, but we also have other routes of administration available as well. And the effects are about 60 to 80 minutes. And so during this time, we're of course with clients, mostly it's an internal journey. In some cases, it's more interactive, and we really are able to kind of show up in whichever way is coming to the surface and is needed at that time. And we also write down anything that is said, and we start to, we can really bring that into integration as well. And so really when the medicine starts to wear off, we're already starting some integration. And so sometimes integration on the day of is through words, but other times it's through journaling, contemplation, art making, or movement. And we really let the client guide what this integration process right after looks like. I like to call this the golden hour, right, as the medicine's wearing off, where consciousness is open, but also starting to return to a more ordinary state. Can be a really powerful time to work with people. And in step number 5, integration. So as I mentioned, integration, is starting right after the session, and it's of course a lifelong process. but we also like to weave it into the entirety of our model. And so we found it really helpful to meet the next day for a more focused integration session. So much typically can continue to unfold for people in the days and weeks following an experience. So we like to really have that structured integration time the next day, or sometimes the next 2 days, as well as providing clients with supplemental materials to support their process. So whether that's the playlist of the music that they heard during their experience, or some podcast, we have some journaling prompts and guides that we've put together. We really like to be able to offer support in a lot of different ways. And integration is really a time to help clients bring awareness to their experience and that space to reflect and make meaning of their journey. As a somatic therapist, I often bring in a lot of nervous system work here, as well as Hakomi, which is a modality I'm trained in, which is somatic mindfulness, which is can be really helpful in supporting this type of work as well. And so some themes that often emerge during integration are insight and meaning of their experience, behavior change, spiritual and existential exploration, how to speak with loved ones about these experiences, as well as working with clients to make note of what they can bring back to their primary therapist. And we do want to just note here that while we're sort of presenting this model that includes our ketamine work, we also do work with individuals who might only be looking for integration after a psychedelic experience, or might even be in psychedelic crisis, or who might be going abroad for a retreat or somewhere else, and they are looking for preparation before and for integration after. In these cases, we kind of do the same setup, but of course, just leave out the ketamine focused parts of things and adjust it to be relevant to what they're going to be doing. And so next slide. All right. So these are just some spheres of integration. This is a cool image that comes from Nest Harm Reduction. They're a great organization. Many people say that one psychedelic therapy session can be like years of therapy. Whether this is the case or not, what often happens is that a lot can start to unfold for people. Maybe it's a new sense of peace, joy, or connection, or whether it's an experience of death and rebirth, or a sense of like past lives coming up, or some really intense somatic energy movements. And maybe it's even working with the disappointment of an unmet expectation for the experience or hope for the experience. There's really never a scarcity of rich material to work with during integration. And oftentimes clarity can also emerge alongside these lessons that are learned in really deep spaces. So a lot of our work is starting to weave these lessons and these potentially meaningful experience and shifts back into their day-to-day life. And so we find that it can be helpful to check in with clients about these different spheres of self-care that are listed here, such as physical, occupational, environmental, financial, social, emotional, intellectual. I think I said them all, spiritual. And that these different spheres that make up the whole person, these really profound and transformative experiences have the potential to impact every single aspect of who we are. And so can be helpful to check in with them just to see how these lessons and how these transformative experiences start to weave into these different aspects of self-care. And we also do like to balance that with a mindfulness and experiential based approach and integration as well. And so, there's the honoring of intention, and whether it's for one of these spheres to really have some shifts in it. But we also want to make space for whatever wants to keep unfolding in that moment to moment experience. Next slide. All right. And so some harm reduction tips and resources. And these are great resources, professionally, personally, to share with friends, clients, whoever. I kind of mentioned the Zendo project. They are really awesome. They offer, psychedelic harm reduction through peer support trainings, education, consulting, resources to the community. Fireside Project is another awesome organization. It's a peer support hotline that's staffed with trained volunteers who can offer support in a psychedelic emergency. And so that 62-fireside, that is the hotline number. I give that to most of all of my clients. You know, even if somebody is just having trouble in integration, their hotline can support people, and it's a free resource. And I also mentioned Nest Harm Reduction. They offer trainings and consultation, community support, and Dance Safe, which promotes health and safety through drug testing materials that you can buy online. And so, yeah, and then I also wanted to mention on the right, here are just some basic harm reduction tips that were taken from Fireside Project's website. And so here's just some basic things. A lot of this is what we've already gone over. But yeah, just some good, like straight to the point, little tips that we can bring with us tonight, maybe. Yeah. I think we can do the next slide. All right. So you want to be a psychedelic therapist. we get a lot of calls and emails, and we're really excited that this is such a growing community and that there's so much interest and desire for people to get involved, and thought it might be helpful just to kind of break down some of the ways that we can step into this space. And so one of the ways is offering psychedelic affirming therapy. This would be where, you know, you can just offer support with your clients and their personal decision of accessing psychedelic therapy. That might be sharing resources, helping them make an informed decision, offering harm reduction tips, and potentially referring out for additional support. This is a really vibrant and growing community with a lot of practitioners. And there's a lot of great options, and even people just to connect with and share case consultation or resources. Yeah, we're all really happy to do that. And so number 2, offering preparation and integration therapy. And so an integration support. And so this would be maybe more for practitioners who are interested in being a little bit more hands-on, doing a little bit more of the deeper work around preparation and integration. And there's many great programs that offer training for providing prep and integration. Some of these programs include Numinous, Fluence, Psychedelics Today, CIIS, of course, as well. And the work in this category can be supporting clients that are experiencing psychedelics in a more therapeutic setting, as well as potentially in festival settings, ayahuasca retreats with friends or with a guide. The whole variety and spectrum of use. And then number 3 would be more of psychedelic assisted therapy. And so in this context, one can offer full-scale services, including prep, integration, and therapy during psychedelic experiences. In the Amazon, where individuals are trained to work with ayahuasca, it's a decade-long process of learning how to work with the medicine and the many realms that individuals enter. And so here it looks a little different, of course, and it's typically a multi-year process that includes proper education and training, continued personal experiences, shadowing and supervision, and collaboration with colleagues. And an understanding of the nuanced complexities of the psychedelic field is encouraged. There are many angles to explore, from policy and the war on drugs to traditional indigenous use and rights, access, social justice, and to the emergence of MDMA, psilocybin, and other molecules, where there are nuances in the therapeutic approach. Yeah, next slide. All right. So where to go from here? So kind of put here 3 organizations that have already done the work to create ethical guidelines. So we have the North Star Pledge, and that's created over a 6-month process with input from from many different stakeholders and the community. Feel free to check out that pledge. And if you feel moved, we would invite you to sign it. It includes many of the different ethical principles and guidelines that we've covered here tonight. And the MAPS MDMA assisted therapy ethics guide, and they have 12 areas of focus. And that is, a little bit more tailored to the therapeutic setting. And the Shakruna ethics guide, which is more of a plant medicine guide around sexual abuse and what's happened in the ayahuasca community and how to stay safe. And next slide. Yeah, and I'm actually going to do a quick time check. Robert, I'm thinking maybe we want to just go to questions. What are
Yeah,
your
there's a couple good questions. Sonia asked, what would have been most helpful for you when you were in the midst of your difficult, challenging journey?
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
question.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Something I've thought a lot about. The person that I was with, I trusted and I thought that they were skilled to be able to help me in that case. And kind of looking back on it, I think that I wasn't in quite the most supportive or safest setting. So I think that would have been, really obviously a helpful shift. As well as, things like changing the music or bringing in sense, like like just shifting the energy in the environment a little bit can go a really long way. As well as, I think she did hold my hand, which was really great and felt grounding at times. But some of the tips that I think I would have found really helpful would have just been supporting me in actually going towards what was happening. So getting to maybe name what's happening if I had language, which I had moments of language, getting to really try and feel my way through what was happening. And so one of the Zendo principles around harm reduction is to talk through, not down. So sometimes, if we are with somebody and they can get really, really scared and nervous, and we might have a tendency to want to talk them down and ground them, but that can actually be even more that can bring up even more fear and terror if we don't have access to more of that ground to stand on. And so what can be really helpful, and I think what would have been helpful, is to really have support helping me walk through it. And so that would be really getting to turn towards my experience with with just some curiosity and compassion.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah. And I'll add to, I mean, something we talk to a lot of our clients about is like the concept of impermanence. I mean, no matter what comes up, it's temporary. And keeping that in mind can be really helpful, especially when we're in a challenging place. I know I bring in, and Lindsey does too, a lot of the concept of parts like IFS or Hakomi talks about it. And so really getting like curious about why this is coming up. And so can we shift how we're greeting whatever anxiety, fear, discomfort that may be arising for someone. So yeah, there's a couple other things to throw in there.
And I'll just add kind of one thing. A lot of my kind of background was coming from more of the ayahuasca ceremonial world, actually. And a lot of my training and what I was learning about some indigenous practices is that it is quite energetic. It's not with language. It's not even necessarily with touch. It's through sound. It's with energy. And so really, as Robert had mentioned, that these are often really ineffable places that are beyond language. And so meeting somebody in that place with language doesn't always work. And so having some different tools, whether it's, whether like we talked about, obviously like a safe and supportive touch, but also, with music can be a really powerful tool as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in regards to ethics too, I would say this is an area that's a little bit tricky in like the Western world. Because one of the things that I would probably ideally recommend to a lot of my clients is, I mean, speaking of the energetic piece, movement or sound, yelling, whatever somebody feels called to do. That said, we're often in this like office environment that has a lot of constraints on movement as far as, just space or liability or, there's sound or noise concerns. So there's kind of a just wanted to note, I mean, there's a little bit of a conflict there, with the kind of Western medical model and psychedelics. So, when looking at where to do psychedelics, it means something to keep in mind. something that has some space for movement, some safe movement, not a lot of trip hazards. If you are open to clients moving, a lot of people do, like a little mat, like ground mattress, so people at least have some kind of like lateral freedom there. Yeah, so something to keep in mind there. Lindsay, anything else on that?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, and Jill had a really good question. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about your thoughts on making an underground referral with intention of providing informed consent, harm reduction, or recognition of religious exemption. So yeah, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. I personally don't directly make underground referrals. I do refer out of state, for Colorado or something in Oregon. I do refer or make people aware of some of the religious organizations because it is technically legal. There's the what is it, Religious Freedom and Restoration Act that was passed, and there's a couple of Supreme Court cases that got one protecting the right of religious sacraments, psychedelic religious sacraments. So it is legal, bit of a gray area, but if there's going to be a problem, I mean, it's not going to be with the participant in the ceremony. So that is a referral source with all of it. I mean, we definitely offer preparation on the front end, integration on the back end to really kind of like bracket support with that. I personally am also happy to provide feedback I've heard around some local underground guides. I don't directly refer to anybody, but with the clients we've worked with, we've gotten a lot of feedback from people who have. And so I do pass along that information because there's it's a little, I don't know what you say, Lindsay, hit or miss with what we've heard. It's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just linking in a couple resources here that I think go to answering some of the questions and things to discuss with a prospective psychedelic facilitator, some warning signs, things to kind of look for. I think, yeah, I definitely echo everything that Robert was saying. I think in terms of harm reduction, one of the main things that I would look for is just the years of experience that somebody has, both their own personal experience, but also years of experience, in the position that they're in as a facilitator and space holder. And so that's one thing to consider in any training that they've had as well. And yeah, what does trauma-informed care look like for them?
Let's see. Susan,
Yeah.
good. Go ahead. Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to answer a different question.
Yeah, well, I was actually gonna read that question too. So
oh,
from
okay,
Susan,
go for it then. Yeah. Okay.
Is there added liability for therapists when using these medicines? Yeah, how do you protect your business and clients if somebody has had a bad experience? That's awesome. Thanks, Jill. Jill says Baldwin Risk Partners is launching a liability insurance for psychedelic practitioners. I just learned that, so that's awesome. Yeah, and it's definitely something that we have talked through and worked through, and lots of considerations around that. And yeah, I mean, liability insurance that covers our work is really important, as well as all of the harm reduction approaches and principles that we kind of make throughout our process is a really big part of trying to reduce any sort of risk of harm, both psychologically for clients and legally for us.
Yeah. I will say I personally use I actually just had to look it up, CM and F group for my liability insurance because they specifically said through email, I got it written in an email that they do cover psychedelic assisted therapy. I was with CPH and Associates who like 2, 3, 4 years ago said they did. And when I checked it again with them this year, they were like, no, of course we don't cover that. So you may want to specifically get in writing from a liability carrier if they cover it or not. But I'm curious about this like microdose article or if or the Baldwin Risk Partners. I mean, might be great to go with that. You know, and generally liability, I mean, it is something that we think of a lot. There are some gray areas with liability. We think of, you know, like some of the setups with ketamine lozenges. So clients bring in their own ketamine lozenge. Depends on the setup. I mean, we have a provider in building, but you know, clients can bring in their own ketamine lozenge from like Mind Bloom, for instance, and take their own blood pressure. We sit with them for the therapeutic part, you know, and then they kind of you know, get a ride, they go home, whatever. So we're in the therapeutic piece of it, but it's you know, the you know, they're guiding the medical piece, so to speak. That said, you know, it hasn't really been tested as far as you know, what the liability really looks like with that. Presumably we're just holding the therapeutic space and people are responsible for the medical space. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately a little bit of what we just kind of sign up for with this work of, you know, there's some gray areas that haven't been tested.
Yeah. And I kind of suggest maybe for the rest of the kind of our time together, if we could get out of the screen sharing and maybe see each other.
Oh, that
That's
might be
kind of
nice.
it from us on this on the slides.
Yeah, we had a few ethical dilemmas, but those are kind of boring. I think we lost Melissa.
Oh, there we go. Oh,
There we
that's so
go.
much better. Oh my gosh, I do so much better with like real human faces than
Oh
reading
no,
off of
people.
notes. So, whoo, okay. Yeah, so I mean, would just
Uh,
like really love to open it to a
mm,
conversation. There's you know, other people on here that also do this work and have so much great
mhm.
wisdom to share. And so, yeah, I think just opening for any comments, questions, anything anyone might want to add.
Yep, Betty. Yeah, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for that. That was great. I had a question about one of your rule outs because I had
Mhm.
someone, I'm seeing someone who was considering doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy and did have a negative experience in a medical setting where during uh, some kind of a crisis, they were given a lot of ketamine as a
Mhm.
sedating thing and had a very bad experience.
Mhm.
um, you know, set and setting was kind of horrible, being kind of taken
Sure.
down to the floor and injected by a bunch of people. So I'm really kind of concerned about the PTSD element
Mhm.
getting triggered with that, even though the place he was talking to, and it wasn't you all, had said they use such lower doses that that kind of thing wouldn't happen. But, and I just would like your thoughts on that because I'm trying to figure out how to advise.
And the question
Yeah.
is given his past experience, would sort of the psychedelic trauma from that experience be potentially a rule out for future
Mhm.
experiences?
That is the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say not, that's not a rule. I would the to explain that bullet point or slide a little bit further, that was more of like a physical, negative physical reaction. You know, a kind of difficult, challenging, traumatic trip. I mean, it can be it can lead to people not wanting to, you know, do future psychedelic work, or you know, it's just not a road we go down, but it's not in and of itself a rule out. I mean, we've worked with a lot of people who had negative experiences, usually at you know, clinics where there wasn't any sort of support, or at home, you know, when there wasn't any sort of support, or sometimes when there was, and it just didn't go well. So those are clients we can definitely work with. We usually do a lot more preparation with those type of clients. You know, sometimes, as I recall, I think you and I talked years ago, Betty, about doing a lot of EMDR. So, you know, that's a client I'd probably do like a lot of trauma work with first, you know, to really kind of de-escalate the system a little bit on the front end. You know, maybe kind of titrate up with dosage, start really slow, kind of go up from there. But yeah, a previous, you know, kind of challenging or bad trip is not in and of itself a forever rule out.
So the negative response to ketamine had to do with a physiological negative response in the rule out list.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ah,
Yeah. And yeah, for the rule out, allergic reaction, essentially. Mm-hmm.
okay.
That probably would have been a much
I heard
better
negative reaction. I was like,
phrasing.
full stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That helps
Yeah,
to
good
clarify.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. And just sort of echoing Robert's kind of point around like the extra preparation and really integration from that experience that he had, and whether that's, you know, EMDR or somatic approach, and really just that easing back in if they are wanting to try ketamine again, really focusing on the set and the setting preparation and also the dosing part of that. And I don't think, you know, we could never guarantee that that wouldn't happen again. There's always a risk, no matter how great of a container it is. And so, you know, I would just say again, doing the steps to try to reduce the risk. But also that, you know, we do believe there's a lot of benefit that can come through working through challenging experiences as well.
And follow-up question to that is, some places, and I can't, I don't remember the place. Some people are kind of just given the dose and just sort of left. And I told him under no circumstances is that allowed for him. That if he needs to pay extra for the, you know, person, do that. Is that ever a thing that you do up there? It sounds like that is just not part of your philosophy of work at all.
No, we're always have somebody in the room with a client, always do preparation, always do integration. And so, yeah, that's definitely not our
so
setup.
You don't recommend any of the, you know, if it's just used for pain management or whatever, they'll just sort of leave people with it. You don't think that's safe or smart?
I mean, I think Lindsey and I have some good discussions around this. I would say my personal belief is I think it does more good than harm. I think ketamine has shown to be extremely effective for treatment-resistant depression. I think that setup is, you know, it costs less because they are, you know, just kind of injection put in a room. And so I think that helps with accessibility for people. I mean, there was a recent study about ketamine really helping with suicidality in that type of setting. And so I do think that it probably does more good than harm. That said, it definitely does harm at times. And I don't think it's the optimal setup. And, you know, I think your client's a great example of that. And we have a good number of people that reach out with very similar stories. So, you know, in the kind of balancing acts, you know, I'd say I mean, I'm glad infusion clinics exist. But we get a lot of calls. So it's not an uncommon story.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. Terrific.
Yeah. Sonia, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I'm wondering if y'all are seeing a lot of nausea accompanying ketamine.
Some, yeah, actually the last Polaris, which Polaris Insight Center, for anyone interested, does great ketamine assisted psychotherapy trainings. They actually had statistics where they track nausea. And I feel like, and this kind of matched ours, in-office nausea was around like 10%. Or I'm sorry, I think that was their at-home ketamine. And then in office nausea, I think it was around 20%. So, I mean, it's fairly common. We always recommend people, you know, they're not like super with it, so this isn't always possible, but keep your head still. That does help a lot with nausea, because it's really easy to kind of get the like a motion sickness, you know, feeling with ketamine. But
do y'all use Zofran? Do y'all keep Zofran on hand to help if somebody's pretty nauseous?
Yeah, our prescriber does. Yeah, and usually her protocols is it's Dr. Neff we currently work with, for anybody who doesn't know, is she doesn't like to tend to start with it, you know, just because, like, you know, we don't want to throw extra medicine in the system if we don't have to, but it is available on the back end, and then we can also talk about it, you know, second, third, fourth session moving forward. Yeah, I'm a fan of Zofran, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah, other questions? Yeah, well, thanks everybody for coming out, and we'll be available for questions if anybody wants to shoot us an email or
Robert, you
Just-
had
Yeah.
a question from Linda Hardy.
oh, I missed it. Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if there
Oh,
are any resources available for clients without insurance or
Mhm.
that have limited resources themselves. Is there any place to get this done at lower cost?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's actually something we're really excited, and we forgot to mention tonight, but we have partnered with an awesome 501c3 called Thank You Life. And they subsidize these experiences for people.
Mhm.
And so it may not be it's unlikely for it to be a full subsidy to cover the total cost, but it can be fairly significant. And we are also working towards having more group offerings available that will also bring down the cost. And Thank You Life is looking to really subsidize more group sessions than individual sessions as well. And so, yeah, thanks for asking about that. And then I got another question here that came to me in the
Oh.
chat. Oh,
Oh, go
Was
ahead.
that-
Yeah.
oh, okay. Asking if we have people in integration that are depressed and they can't stay there. And then when I hear people that talk about how love-filled and wonderful that trip was, it seems like re-entry into normal life could backfire. I'm not totally sure if I quite understand the whole question, but I think it's something around if people have, a really beautiful experience, is there like a grasping that can happen during integration to kind of get back to that experience? Is that okay? If the person who asked, confirm that that's right. So so that can definitely happen. Somebody has this sort of like breakthrough, unbelievable experience where they feel deeply connected to themselves or to, more of a universal existential connection, and these really beautiful feelings that have been really not accessible for a long time. I think that is something that can definitely happen in integration, which is this sort of grasping or wanting to go back to that and sort of reach for that. And I think that's a really valuable part of integration. And what I've found is that often underneath that grasping is a lot of grief for missing out on some of these feelings of connection. And so that's often where I feel like we go, is what's sort of behind that grasping and that wanting to go back to that. And how can we sort of be with that feeling, that kind of craving for more of that. It's something that we see, and that can be a really powerful part of the integration process for sure. Thanks for asking that.
Sonia?
Was there? Yeah.
Yeah, so back to the terror trip. So my final project at CIIS was a paper on the terror trip, because I was terrified of a terror trip. And one of the pieces of information that I came across, in which it resonated with me, that for those folks who tend towards anxiety in general, and who maybe score a little bit high on neuroses, doing a lot of work on the front end. I mean, we would just not want to throw these people into a psychedelic experience. Maybe doing a lot more prep on the front end around, keeping their central nervous system regulated, working with spaciousness, working with groundedness, maybe even using some anxiolytic supplements like L-theanine or something like that on the front end. All of this, I think, can help to mitigate for that, whatever that percentage is of the population that's just going to have maybe a higher risk of a challenging experience. That was one of my biggest takeaways.
Yeah.
That's great info.
Yeah. And hopefully my terror trip report didn't scare anybody off forever from all of this. Obviously, I'm
Mhm.
here and doing the work and love what I do. But yeah, I think I really agree with you, Sonia. And I think that that would have been probably really, really helpful for me at the time. And
Mhm.
that's a lot of the work that I do now with clients, kind of being trained in different somatic therapy modalities. A lot of what I'm working with is the nervous system. And so really supporting that direct experience of regulation and ground, and how can we bring that into these expanded states. And so I'm doing a lot of work with like creating a tether or something, even in more of the physical world, that they can bring with them into that space of resource that can kind of draw back to if it starts to get really overwhelming. And so I think that there's a lot of work that can be done on the front end, as well as during, to kind of
Mhm.
reduce that terror trip risk.
Yeah, I would also say, and this is kind of related to Betty's question or client also. I mean, part of what we're excited about for the future is, I mean, different medicine options. Certainly there's medicines that can be a little bit like gentler on the system. Like a lot of people out west, they usually do like 2, 3, 4 MDMA sessions before doing any traditional psychedelics to really work with, a lot of the kind of stored trauma, a lot of the fear, anxiety in the system. I mean, generally starting with MDMA is great because of the down regulation of the amygdala. So that's kind of in the future. And also if we have a specific trigger with a psychedelic, and so I had this terrible ketamine journey, it'll be nice in the future where we don't necessarily have to work through that if we don't want to. I mean, there's other options. I mean, obviously, like, I'm always for, like, let's work through past trauma, let's kind of move past it, be able to open up that option to work with whatever we want. But it'll be nice in the future when we have different options.
Yeah. And I'll just add too that, at NPC, for a client's first ketamine session, we always do a half dose. And so then we check in after about 10 minutes and see if they want a booster. And so that's something that we found to be super valuable, and that also reduces a lot of anxiety in clients, knowing that they're going to not be thrust into the everythingness or nothingness. So,
The abyss.
the abyss, exactly. Yeah.
Linda?
Yeah, Linda.
One more question. I know it's almost time to quit. Is there any research or data about doing psychedelic assisted therapies with neurodivergent clients?
Isn't there a study going on right now using, I think is it psilocybin with autism, I think. Yeah, I can do a little research on that. I know I read about that recently.
Yeah.
There
I'm not
is
familiar
a-
with the study. Oh, go ahead, Tom. Yeah.
There is a study that showed MDMA reduced social anxiety in neurodivergent people.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And Jill has a book that's about autism and psychedelics. That's awesome, Jill. What's the name of that book? Okay. Try to find it. Great.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Sorry, I was gonna have to unmute me. I'd have to run upstairs and grab it. I picked it up at the Psychedelic Science conference. I haven't read it yet. It's a small book, but I can try to post it somewhere because I realize we're about to leave. We're about to close up. Linda, I could certainly send it to you, and if anybody else needs it, I'd be happy to try to figure out how to send it.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like somebody might have, Stu just linked us the study of psilocybin and autism. So thank you, Stu. And yeah, and I would just say I have some, personal experience working with clients with neurodivergence as well. And so that's something we can always talk more about, but I know we're about to run out of time. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some stuff out there. I mean, that's probably an example too, where as research continues, I mean, I think we're getting a really good foundation of like, okay, MDMA for PTSD, psilocybin, depression, and we'll be able to get a lot more fine tuning in the future with, things like neurodivergence. But yeah, hopefully more research soon.
Yeah. And just in terms of contact information for us, if anybody does want to reach out, feel free. Robert and I are super available, whether it's going out for coffee or a phone call or just an email just to say hi. You can reach us at there we go, NashvillePsychedelicCenter.com. Yeah. And we have a great community with some amazing practitioners that are also in this field. So also we do have a Facebook group. Robert, do you want to link that as well?
On it.
Okay. And if anybody would like to join that group, it's fairly inactive, but we do have some intentions to be a little more active on it. And yeah, please feel free to join that and network with fellow psychedelic therapy enthusiasts in the community. Awesome. Okay. I think this is when we say bye.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.